Hello, my friend. Thank you for tuning in to Deep Six, the Deep State, my daily recitation of the news as I see it. Not everybody else does, but I try to give you my unique perspective on this stuff. First of all, of course, we're all very upset by the Las Vegas shooting. It was horrible. It was terrible, vicious, evil, just and sick and demented and deranged. But I do have some thoughts about it. The first is that a lot of these shootings are from people who have been diagnosed with mental illnesses and have had prescription medicines made for them and are not taking it. And I have no idea whether this shooter was in that category, but increasingly, but when someone acts out like this, there has to be some mental derangement. And there are medications that deal with that. And on medication, that kind of a schizophrenic, if that's what he was, can function normally and not be a threat to anybody. The issue is, do they take their meds or not? And I believe that there should be a great deal of research focused on the idea of a patch, which you can put on your skin, and you automatically are dosed, just like nicotine patches are, with the psychotropic medication, or conceivably something that even could be grafted into a person, a skin graft, and would release that medication involuntarily on a daily basis. And I don't think anything of that sort exists, but it ought to. And there ought to be research to establish it, and it ought to be able to be developed. And if it is developed, the court should use the authority that it has for involuntary commitment to people, to mental institutions, instead to involuntarily force them to have this implant and take their meds on a daily basis as a precondition of being released from a mental hospital. I don't think we legally can make people take medicine, but what I think we can do is to say, we'll keep you in a mental institution and never let you out unless you agree to have this implanted and take the medication involuntarily. That, I think, would be a very good answer to some of this stuff. Remember, we used to have tens and hundreds of thousands of people in mental hospitals. In New York State, at one point, we had about 30,000 at the peak. And then, to save costs, and because of the development of psychotropic drugs, we released them. But we never really did an effective job of following up to be sure that they're taking their medication. And this would be a situation where that, I think, would be called for. Now, the other thought is, I was shocked today to read that Haley Geftman Gold, Geftman -Gold, first name Haley, who is was the former vice president and senior counsel to CBS. That's a pretty high position in CBS. Senior counsel is pretty high up. And she's been fired today because she said, I believe in a Facebook post, that she's not even sympathetic to the victims of the LA shooting because country music fans often are Republican when discussing the mass shooting. This individual who was with us for approximately, I'm sorry, this is CBS that said, violated our standards of our company and is no longer an employee. Haley, for her part, said if they wouldn't do anything when children were murdered, presumably meaning Sandy Hook, I have no hope that Republicans will ever do the right thing. I'm actually not even sympathetic to country music fans because they were often Republicans and gun toters. This phenomenon of politicizing every terrorist incident on both sides of the fence, I think, is wrong. I think it's wrong when conservatives go after this and say that, we'd let the immigrants into the country. Although if it's a case of someone who was an immigrant and came in, yeah, I think we should point that out. But when liberals attempt to use this to score a political point. I think it's just reprehensible and wrong, and they're using the tragedy and trying to politicize it. And I think that's a serious mistake and not something that we should do. Now, my third thought about this is that we all appreciate the joy of open-air concerts, and particularly in a city, we appreciate the idea that there are buildings all around us, and here we are free with the stars above us and listening to music, and I think it's wonderful. But I don't think we can do that anymore. I think those days are over. I think all concerts, like movies and theaters and other performances, should be indoors and should be placed in places with metal detectors and with security guards. I just went to Yankee Stadium the other day, and I walked in, and there were 50,000 people attending the game. And it was no obstacle to have your bag searched and have it go through a metal detector. There was no problem. There was no big backup or line. It functioned very smoothly. And there's no reason why we should expose people when they go to mass concerts or other events to this kind of jeopardy. And I think that there's no reason for us to do that. So I believe that that is another change that should take place.
Well, we have some comments here right now, Dick.
Please.
And just give me 1 second. I apologize. They're all rolling in here, so I'm trying to reach them.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Well, first of all, Mark Vidalis says, time to fire Sessions. He's not the bulldog we thought or told he was.
We'll get to Sessions in a minute, yeah.
Yes, and also, there people are all saying a big disappointment in Jeff Sessions right now. So, and they're all very saddened about what's
Well, let's
going
go on to Sessions from that horrible shooting in Vegas. This has not received much coverage, so I'm giving it a lot of coverage now. Jason CHAFFETZ, who's a friend and is a former congressman and was chairman of the Government Reform Committee until last year when he left Congress, went on Fox News and said that he met with Sessions and urged him directly to prosecute the Hillary Clinton crimes, and that Sessions told him he was not going to do that. Specifically, Sessions said, I can tell you that while I was in Congress and the chairman of the Oversight Committee, I did go over and visit with Attorney General Sessions, and it was one of the most frustrating discussions I had, because whether it was the IRS, Fast and Furious, the email scandal that we went through, I did not see the Attorney General willing to just let Lady Justice administer justice and then follow through. In other words, not willing to indict and not willing to proceed with a criminal justice referral. He told me he basically let me know that he wasn't going to pursue anything on major cases. And this is furthered by CHAFFETZ. Yes, the email scandal of Hillary Clinton. We had Brian Pagliano. He's the guy who installed the server for Hillary. I issued a subpoena for him to appear before the committee, and he said no. He didn't even show up. We issued another subpoena. The U.S. Marshal served it. And in my world, if you're in court, I guarantee you that a subpoena is not an optional activity. We wanted the Attorney General to prosecute him, and he said no. Now, these were perfectly understandable if it was Loretta Lynch saying no. But here it's Jeff Sessions saying no. And I cannot imagine why he would do that. It could be conceivably that he had recused himself from any matters affecting Hillary, but that wasn't based on a conflict. That was just based on his saying nasty things about Hillary during the campaign. Well, it's time that we make politicians responsible once they take office for what they said while they were on the campaign trail. And this is the first time that Sessions has publicly said that he would not pursue these cases, that he was not going to prosecute these cases. And that leaves us with no alternative, really, but to demand that President Trump get Sessions' resignation and appoint an Attorney General, hopefully my own candidate would be Rudy Giuliani, who really will prosecute these cases and will take them seriously. So if you go to dickmorris.com, my website, we have a petition there now urging people to, writing to Trump and urging him to replace Sessions with somebody who's prepared to do his job. These are serious crimes, and they deserve to be prosecuted.
I'll be posting that in the comment section for the petition. But Galen King said that she thinks maybe on Facebook that Sessions took a $15 million bribe to not prosecute Hillary. Have you heard anything about that, Dick?
No, I've not. I think that, let's just go through what we're talking about here. Hillary used a private server, and she said that she turned over all of the emails to the State Department, which then gave them to the FBI. That was a lie. She did not turn them all over. There were about 13,000 work-related emails. She claimed they were only personal emails that she deleted. And there were at least 13,000 work-related emails that the Justice Department and the State Department uncovered after she tried to delete them, and issued them in public, and they were clearly work-related. She said that she did not use the private server to send or receive classified information. That was totally untrue. There were numerous emails, hundreds of them, that had classified information on them. She claims that it wasn't marked classified, but that's because she was the one in charge of marking it classified as Secretary of State. She and a handful of others had that power, and yet she didn't do it. But in her claiming that she never sent or received classified information is just wrong. It's a subterfuge, and it's indictable. In the Fast and Furious scandal, let's stay with the Hillary scandals. In the Clinton Foundation issue, we have lots of evidence of favors being done by the Secretary of State for people who were donors to the Clinton Foundation. We have emails where the donor asked the Clinton Foundation for help in getting Hillary to set up a meeting for them. Then we have emails where somebody on the staff of the foundation emailed Hillary or Uma Abedin, who was her appointments assistant, and said, please get this person a meeting. They gave us money. And then we have emails completing the chain saying we spoke to Hillary about it and it will happen. And then the meeting took place. If that is not pay for play, and if that well-documented loop is not prosecutable, then I don't know what is. Now, outside of the purview of Hillary, we also have the IRS scandal, where there is clear evidence that the IRS deliberately targeted conservative political action groups for heavy investigation and for revocation of their tax-exempt status. In most cases, it wasn't a revocation, it was a prosecution or an investigation that took up more than a year and deluged them with paperwork requests, way beyond what they did for anybody else, making it practically impossible for them to participate actively in the 2012 election. And in the Fast and Furious scandal, the Justice Department completely ignored requests for documents about Fast and Furious. Fast and Furious, you may remember, was a program that was initiated under Obama by the Justice Department, where they said that we will deliberately send guns to drug cartels, almost like radioactive tracers, so that we could trace where it went, who had it, and we could look at the route that gun smugglers were using. But the problem was that they couldn't trace them, and they ended up providing lots of weaponry to some of the most dangerous gangs in the country. And the Justice Department refused to release stuff on it, and Holder, who was the AG at the time, may well have lied to Congress about that program. But we'll never know if the Attorney General is not willing to investigate this, not willing to follow crime and to follow the breadcrumbs wherever they lead.
Frank Beerfriend wants to know, is the deep state keeping Sessions from pursuing Hillary, Gowdy, etc.?
Well, it might be. I can't understand the motivation, but it might be. They might have their tentacles into him. Sessions was one of the real firebrands when Trump appointed him. He was one of the earliest people endorsing Trump. He overtly called for Hillary to lock her up, called for her imprisonment, and really was aggressive in that issue. And for him now to be not prosecuting in the way you just heard, and presumably to be complicit in the FBI decision not to release Hillary documents that are requested by Judicial Watch under the Freedom of Information, claiming that there's no public interest in them, is absurd. And you have to wonder what caused that pivot, what caused that change. And the jury's open on that. I don't know the answer to it. But the fact that it took place is very disturbing. Now you know that nothing is flipping Trump, that Trump is going to be just as aggressive and just as strong on this as he has always been. And I think that this overt statement by Sessions, particularly if we underscore it by sending thousands and thousands of petitions to Trump, and we make a big deal about this, I think that we may be able to force Trump's hand in getting rid of Sessions. It's unfortunate that it occurred at the same time as the horrible shootings in Vegas, so it didn't receive the press that it needs to. But it was covered heavily on Fox News and Breitbart, and I'm covering it, and I hope that we can make enough of a fuss over it.
Skip Waters wants me to ask you, why has the CIA issued a statement on Vegas situation when this is an FBI jurisdiction?
I wasn't aware that the CIA had, but you're correct. It is the FBI's jurisdiction, except that ISIS claimed credit for the attack and said we did it and that he converted to Islam a few months ago. So maybe it was in response to that. But we'll see. And we'll see if this guy indeed had links to radical Islam.
Mary Beth Tinez wants to know, is Sessions being blackmailed?
I mean, there are all kinds of possible explanations for that. It's hard to tell what it is. Is there compromising material on him? Is the deep state onto his case? Or was he lying all along and he was never really the strong, conservative firebrand that he led us to believe he was? Now, so please go to dickmorris.com and sign that petition. Your signature will be sent directly to the president as an email, and you'll probably get an answer from him. And I really want to pile up popular demand to get rid of Jeff Sessions and to force his hand so that we have an attorney general who really respects the rule of law in this case and in every other case. Now, to go to another part of rule of law, Russia has just denied UN inspectors the right to go to military bases in Iran. Under the provisions of the joint agreement that we have with Iran, there is supposed to be... What you doing?
We're having a problem with the sound today.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
Hope you can hear me.
Let us know if that works better.
The treaty with Iran provides that if the UN inspection agency is denied access to some sites, and it feels that it needs access to those sites to certify that Iran is in compliance, it can petition to the signatories to the treaty to enforce that access. And Russia is, of course, among those. And Russia has said that it will not support demanding access to the military bases. And that's obviously where the work that would be banned has taken place. This makes it almost impossible for Trump to certify in this month that Iran is in compliance because we aren't being allowed to have inspectors say that they're in compliance. If inspectors don't go to the site, they have to rely on things like soil samples and stuff, which we're told come from the site, but could come from anywhere else in Iran that they wanted to. And with Russia taking this step, it clearly, in effect, says that we either have to trust Iran or pull out of the agreement. And I think this is really going to force Trump's hand. It's a big deal, and it's very unexpected. Now, of course, Obama deserves the blame because what a ridiculous mechanism to set up and say that you will need Russian and Chinese permission to enforce a treaty that everybody signed. And it was ridiculous to set that up in the first place. And obviously, Iran is now using that loophole to cheat. So there's no question that it's cheating now, but it is, at this point, getting away with it. Now, Trump is required every 90 days to certify that Iran is keeping the deal. And if not, the United States opts out of the treaty. And he's twice certified that it is, but now I would expect he would have no option but to certify that it's not.
Dick, Carol Elmore says, you can be sure if a Republican had done all of the crooked things Hillary has done, that person would already be in prison. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do completely. I mean, I'm not sure of every count, but yeah, there would be a serious prosecution and there would be a consequence. But as it is, there's none. But I expected that under a Democratic administration. But when it became a Republican administration, particularly with a guy like Sessions in charge, I was very, very surprised.
Luis Rivera says, could it be that Sessions is protecting the office of the presidency, not Obama? Is Jay Sekulow a good prospect for Attorney General?
I don't know about Sekulow. He has been Trump's lawyer, and it might be hard for him then to go and be Attorney General. I mean, I don't see how Sessions could possibly be protecting the president by not going after Hillary. I just don't get it. Now, there are a bunch of cases coming up in the Supreme Court, and one of the most important cases that I just want to flag for you, because we'll be talking about it, is the Janus case, Janus. Right now, if you are in a workplace that is unionized, and you choose not to pay union dues, either because you don't want to join the union or because you don't like the union's political activity, the union has the right in most states to force you to pay an agency fee in lieu of union dues. And that would be a fee that is not dues. You're not a member of the union, but you are paying the union to represent you as your agent. And the dues are the same as the agency fees, so it amounts to mandatory payment of dues. And the conservative group sued and said that was a violation of the constitutional right of free speech. And it went up to the Supreme Court, which broke 4-4 on the case. Gorsuch was not appointed yet, and Scalia did not participate in the decision, and then it was after his death. So with a 4-4 decision, they have now brought the case back, and it's going to be heard by the 9-man court that includes Gorsuch, and one would expect a ruling favorable to the right, banning the collection of these dues. That will be a huge blow to unions in this country, because people throughout the country are choosing to opt out of labor unions, but they're being forced to stay in because the dues are going to be collected whether they quit or not. And this would really create a reason not to participate because you don't want to pay those dues and you don't think it's worth it. And therefore it could be a significant dent in the coffers of unions, particularly public employee unions. It really blows apart the closed shop, which is the key element in unionization today.
Well, first of all, I want to let you know that we're number 2 of live streams in the world right now.
It's great.
Yes. And Hector Morales, his statement is, it's not a Republican administration, it's a Trump administration. We voted in Trump, not the Republicans. Trump has to do something. I'm not going to sit around and wait on the Republicans.
Good. Well, that's great. But Trump is president, and it's about time that in certain areas he started acting like it. In many, many areas he's doing great, and on the whole I strongly approve of the record. But this bit with Sessions and letting Hillary escape any culpability or prosecution, I just don't get. And I don't think Trump supporters get it, and I think it's time we demand action. So go to dickmorris.com and sign that petition that goes directly to Trump and asks him to fire Sessions and appoint somebody that will hold Hillary Clinton to the impartial standards of justice. Now, there's a new book out that I thought was fascinating called Shattered, and it's written by two Washington journalists who are investigating why Hillary lost, why the campaign fell apart. I don't mean from a political point of view, I mean from a journalistic inside scuttlebutt point of view. And they report that there was a meeting right at the time, right after the election, almost immediately after the election was held, at Hillary campaign headquarters, where there was a thorough discussion of the defeat. And apparently Robbie Moak, the campaign manager, and John Podesta, the campaign chairman, met with the staff the day after the election and said, we should all blame this on Russia. We should say that Hillary would have won the election but for Russian intervention. It's important that we do that for her political career, and it's important that we do that to explain the defeat to the American people and to the Democratic Party. And that was the beginning of an effort to get all the ducks in a row and go after Russia for this defeat. Shortly after that, Obama imposed sanctions on Russia for its involvement in defeating Hillary. And the narrative was set and then was perpetuated into the Trump-Russia cover-up scandal. In the book Eileen and I wrote, Rogue Spooks, the Intelligence War on Donald Trump, we document how this was the key decision of their campaign, that they would blame it all on this. They needed to clear the way for Hillary to run again. They needed to clear her name and stop her from being blamed for this defeat. And I'm sure Hillary was in the lead in telling them that that's what she wanted to do. So they invented this completely phony narrative that they initially used to explain Trump's defeat, explain Hillary's defeat, and then used to tie up the Trump administration, get some of its people ousted, get a special prosecutor, maybe lead to impeachment, all based on this completely phony narrative. To understand this, please get a copy of our book, Rogue Spooks, The Intelligence War on Donald Trump. This is a long, deep plot, and this book, Shattered, confirms that the plot was consciously and deliberately set in motion the day after Hillary's defeat.
Dick, Rachel Gaskins, referring back to the earlier conversation about the shooting, we need services for our mentally ill. Also, why not open barracks and close military bases for our homeless veterans?
Barracks and military bases? Okay, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah. Sure. But on your first comment, my point is that we used to lock those folks up. We used to not let them out. And the New York State, as I said, had about 30,000 mental patients involuntarily committed to mental hospitals. They were unsafe, and we couldn't let them out. Now with psychotropic drugs, we say, you can go, just take one of these pills once a day. And if they do, they're not a menace to anyone. They're completely right to let them out, no reason to keep them incarcerated. But when people skip the meds or don't take the meds, then they're serious danger. They're ticking time bombs. And I believe that there needs to be a technology, a medical technology, and a criminal justice procedure where people can be, in effect, given the medication so that it is automatic and it is not a choice that they make to take it or not take it by some implant or something of that sort. I think it's probably feasible to do that, and I think these shootings underscore the importance of that.
Gail Maxey brings up a really great point, Dick. He says, unfortunately, HIPAA laws prevent doctors from reporting persons with mental disorders. That's a huge one, isn't it?
Yeah, but the HIPAA laws are such a dead letter. I mean, we passed this HIPAA law, health privacy, and you're not allowed to disclose anything. But then you have to give the federal government and each state government a complete rundown of everything your patient is suffering, every complaint he's ever made, every diagnosis you've ever performed, every medication he's receiving, and it's all sitting there on a state and a federal computer. And your privacy is just gone. And it's a fiction, HIPAA, a cruel fiction. When you sign that consent form in the doctor's office, it might as well be written on toilet paper because the Obamacare law has completely eviscerated and wiped out those protections. Now, I believe that when a patient is adjudged to be seriously mentally ill and a danger to himself or the community, there ought to be a procedure for involuntary medication, and that should be an explicit exemption to the privacy law.
Dick L. Tardif says, why do the Democrats heavily protect the First Amendment and treat the Second Amendment as nothing important?
Well, for years, the Supreme Court let them. The Supreme Court always held the position that the Second Amendment simply related to your ability to have a militia, a state army that would be at the will of the governor, and unless it was federalized. And that was seen as sort of a way of stopping the tyranny of the federal government. But it's obsolete, it's anachronistic, and therefore the Second Amendment was just never enforced. It's only recently that our consciousness has been raised and that the Supreme Court has rediscovered the Second Amendment and breathed life into it and say it says what it says and it means what it says and we're going to enforce that. But that's a recent development. Now, you probably read a lot about the aid in Puerto Rico and the criticism of Trump for not delivering the aid in a prompt way. First of all, I want to stress that this criticism comes from the mayor of San Juan, a woman who is leftist, a Democrat, and a strong supporter of Hillary, who's using this storm as a way of trying to undermine Donald Trump and convict him of the same malfeasance that Bush was guilty of in the Katrina hurricane. Now, the governor of Puerto Rico, who outranks her and is in more of a position to know, says that this is nonsense, that Trump has given them everything they possibly could, and that this is just a political stunt. But there is now a report that a Puerto Rican-born colonel in the U.S. Army, a Michael A. Valle, a commander of the 101st Air and Space Operations Group and director of the Joint Air Component Coordination Element of the 1st Air Force, responsible for Hurricane Maria relief efforts, has now made the following statement. Quote, they have, meaning Puerto Ricans, has the generator, water, food, medicine, and fuel on the ground, and yet the supplies are not moving across the island as quickly as they're needed. It's a lack of drivers for transport trucks, the 18-wheelers. Supplies we have, trucks we have. There are ships full of supplies backed up in the ports, waiting to have a vehicle to unload into. However, only 20% of the truck drivers are showing up for work. They're private citizens in Puerto Rico paid by companies that are contracted by the government. That means the Teamsters Union drivers didn't show up for work. Only 20% of the drivers are there to distribute supplies. It is not Trump's fault. And in fact, it may be a conscious effort, as cynical and horrible as that might be, to deny aid to the island in order to try to use this to reinforce the image of Trump as a racist. It's despicable because people are dying and starving and in serious danger because these trucks are not being sent out in the island. And it's absolutely vital that that be changed. Trump should consider nationalizing the National Guard and sending them in to drive these trucks if the Teamsters Union won't do it.
Dick Hector Morales says, she's a fraud. I am Puerto Rican and hate what she's saying and doing. Nothing about this crisis. She is a hack. That's what Hector Morales of Puerto Rico says.
Thank you, Hector. I appreciate that. Now, there was a referendum, in Catalonia, and which is Barcelona in the area, that voted in favor of independence. The central government, led by Mariano Rajoy, who, by the way, is a former client of mine, who's the Prime Minister of Spain, said there was no election because it was his policy not to recognize the election and urge people not to vote. And then he sent in the police to try to break up the polling places so there would not be a referendum. And almost 1,000 people were injured. And the specter of a police force trying to stop an election from taking place is a new one for the world and not a very attractive spectacle. Now, I want to just give a little background on this. The reason there is this kind of effort at separatism going on throughout Europe, Scotland wanting to be its own country, Catalonia wanting to be its own country, the Basques wanting to be their own country, is that the European Union deliberately wants to create what it calls a Europe of regions, not a Europe of nations. The whole European Union was founded to end nationalism, to oppose nationalism, and instead have a continentalism and a globalism that would supersede national sovereignty. So they get their revenues from the national governments. The EU doesn't impose any taxes itself. The government of France, the government of Britain, Germany, well now not Britain, Germany, contribute money to the European Union. And it then disperses the money. But it doesn't give it back to the nations. It gives it to the regions within the nations. So Catalonia has its own region and its own budget and its own projects, its own road building, its own cultural projects, everything for that region. And that promotes a regional thinking and a regional identity and leads regions to assume that they could be countries as well. Now, I'm agnostic on the issue of whether Catalonia should be permitted its own existence, but clearly there's a lot of sentiment for that, and clearly a fair and free vote ought to be held. But I just wanted to give you that background on that issue. The NFL protest has petered out. Yesterday, a few teams and a few members of a few teams engaged in the protest. But isn't it a credit to Trump how he was able to stamp it out and stop this from spreading? It could easily have spread into other sports, into baseball, into other gatherings, and by taking a firm stand against the NFL players, it's a little bit like the air traffic controller strike, where Reagan took a firm stand and stopped them from striking against the federal government.
Sean Brandon wants to know, Judicial Watch says they have uncovered evidence of crimes committed by Hillary and Comey and Podesta, etc. So what exactly is their obligation knowing they have this evidence of crimes committed?
Well, they've published their evidence. They don't have to turn it over because they published it. And of course, they would make it available to anyone who asked. It's not up to them to prosecute. It's up to them to do what they did, which is a great organization. They identified the emails in question. They asked for them specifically under Freedom of Information. When they were denied, they litigated and they appealed, and they got a verdict saying that these had to be handed over. And now they're trying to enforce that verdict, and I hope they continue.
And Georgia Tachis wants to know, can we get Pam Bondi for Attorney General?
She's the Attorney General of Florida, and a very, very good person. A staunch conservative, a very good one. And I'd love to see her. I was hoping that she would run for Senate this year, but told her so, but she decided not to. Now, Trump has told Tillerson, the Secretary of State, you're wasting your time talking to North Korea. And people have not known what to make about that. I mean, is he undermining Tillerson? Is he in disagreement with him or what? But they missed the point. Trump is being just like the Ayatollah in Iran. The Iranian negotiators go to the conference table and say, look, I'm a reasonable guy. I'm a normal person. And I think this deal is good. I think we shouldn't have nuclear weapons. I agree with all of this. But I've got this maniac back home, the Ayatollah, and I have to satisfy him. I can't sign this agreement without his permission. And he's a hardliner. He's not going to listen to reason. There's nothing I can do with him. And in a sense, that's what the North Koreans do too. They say, hey, we have this Kim Jong-un, and we have to do what he says. And, you know, the guy could be a little crazy, and he could push a button anytime he wanted to. and we better be careful about that. And now what Trump is doing is saying, you got a problem with me too, because I'm not going to give this up, and I'm going to stay on this position, and I'm going to push it. Richard Nixon, when he became president, said, the first duty of the President of the United States of America is to convince the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Union of Socialist Republics that he's crazy, that the president is crazy, and that he might do anything. He might push the button, he might blow up the world. God knows what he's going to do. And it was based on that uncertainty that he felt that Russia would never attack us. And in a way, Trump, I think, is employing a bargaining strategy in dealing with the North Koreans that I think is very effective. And those who are misunderstanding what he's doing and saying that he's undermining the negotiations aren't understanding Donald Trump. He's crazy like a fox. What he's doing is setting this thing up to go someplace.
We have a question. This actually was posted last week, and I promised I'd get to it. This is a gentleman that watches from Rio de Janeiro.
Hey.
His name is, I hope I pronounce it correctly, Abate Valverde. Regarding the Korean crisis, could it be possible if President Trump spoke of unification of the Koreans as an alternative attenuation for a solution, or is this similar to Israel versus Palestinian conflict?
No, it's quite different from Israel-Palestine. Israel and Palestine, they're ethnically completely different and enemies, and most of the people in Palestine, such as it is, fled from Israel. So reunification is not in anybody's interest. In Korea, they're the same people, they're the same ethnicity, and they should be able to reunify. The issue is, of course, reunify how? Are you going to sell South Koreans into slavery and have to live under the North regime? Or are you going to have it as a democracy and the North will fall and they'll be thrown out of power and they'll be like all the other leaders of Eastern Europe communist parties that are, now selling newspapers on the corner. And that's the real issue. Now, it is true that reunification offers a framework to dismantle their nuclear weapons, but it's not the key to the solution. It's going to be a following indicator of the solution. Now, one final thing that I want to talk about. The Interpol, the International Police Organization, has just admitted Palestine, the Palestine government, as a member, which means that Palestine, beyond having certain credibility and support for having this official status, now has access to all of the classified secure information on terrorists stored in the Interpol site. It's like the government just hired the mob to conduct its investigation of the mob, or at least have access to all of it. And that is a serious problem. And the United States should... Sorry. And the United States should withdraw from Interpol unless they kick the Palestinians out. The decision to bring them in was made by a secret ballot of the nations that are members of Interpol. And 67 voted in favor, 20 or 30 voted against it, including the U.S., another 10 or 15 abstained. I think the United States should leave Interpol rather than let those documents be turned over to the Palestinians. When we come back tomorrow, I want to talk to you about the general issue of Palestine aid, because the Palestinians, 3 days ago, their terrorists killed 3 Israeli soldiers. And after that mayhem, the Palestinian government paid the terrorist families $1,700 and agreed to pay them $700 a month for the rest of their lives as a reward for that act of terrorism. And who supplied the money for that? We did. So I want to talk about that when we come back tomorrow. In the meantime, Cherise Harris is the winner of our selfie of the day, who took a wonderful photo of herself, looking gorgeous, and holding a copy of Rogue Spooks, an even more gorgeous book cover that she had just purchased.
And if you remember right, Dick, she was going to read it when she was on her trip, and hope she had a great trip.
Good. Okay, great. Thank you, Cherise. You take care. Thanks a lot.